Hi everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel. I'm Esther. Hope you're well, hope you're doing well wherever you are. I'm doing this in the dark and I've got like fake light on. I feel like I look odd lighting wise, but that's okay. But anyways, I'm going to be doing a slightly different type of content today. I'm going to be sharing my perspective on gratitude. Typically on my YouTube channel, I talk about makeup, fashion, and I guess in my vlogs you get more of an insight into who I am as a person. And anybody who knows me knows that I enjoy deep and meaningful conversations, and so I thought I'd share that side of myself also on my channel. I'm a bit nervous about sharing my perspectives because I feel like sometimes in the online space, you can be misunderstood, and I don't know, people can be a bit judgmental, but I enjoy talking about these things, and so I decided I'm going to do it. But anyways, I'm going to share my perspective on gratitude. And I've also written down my points because, what is this? I've written down my points because if I don't have my points written down, I will waffle because I have too many thoughts at once. So my perspective on gratitude. I think when it comes to the concept of gratitude in society, it's something that a lot of us are aware that we need to have. We get told that quite a lot in society of, oh, you need to be grateful. I think that's the very common phrase. That's the most common phrase. We're grateful for what you have, right? I think gratitude is a way that we practice positivity because it's that thing of the glass either being half full or being half empty. And I think gratitude is one of the ways that you gain the perspective of your glass being half full. And so I understand how important that is in daily life. It does help you, I guess, I'm going to use the word cope. It helps you cope with the reality that we're in when you practice that way of gratitude, that perspective in life, right? So I'm 32 years old, and over my 32 years of life, I'm a very reflective person. My experience in life has really allowed me to reassess what I am grateful for and what I apply this concept to. And I think that's more what I want to share today. I think that in society, even though we're told to practice gratitude and be grateful for what we have, I think we need to start reassessing what we apply this concept to. And we need to be conscious of how we use this notion of gratitude. So to explain how I came to my understanding of what gratitude is, I'm going to give you more of a insight about myself, which I'm nervous to share about, but okay. So I was born in Lagos, Nigeria. I moved over to the UK when I was 12, and I'm 32 years old now, so I've been in the UK for about 20 years. So growing up in Nigeria, my family dynamics, I came from what would be described as a middle-class family at the time. My mum worked at a bank and my dad was a car dealer, like he traded cars. So we were financially stable enough to be able to afford education, private education for me, and also private healthcare for the family, which are very, sorry, sirens, which is a very big deal. I would say you could compare Nigeria to America. Probably, it's a bit more exacerbated, the problems in society, but in terms of social welfare and how you have to have enough money to earn your social welfare, it's exactly the same. In America also, education and healthcare can be stressful to access if you're not financially capable. So that was my background in Nigeria. As I grew older, as I became more aware, I started to realize that actually a lot of things in my life, in my childhood, were not quite right. I had a very traumatic childhood. It's something that I had to really work on in my adult life. I don't think I realized how stressed I was as a kid. So as I grew up in Nigeria, I became aware of the fact that my family's financial status was changing. So my mum at some point lost her job and my dad had issues with alcohol. So, financially we weren't good at a point, and so my mom decided to make the move to England, and we came over to the UK. My childhood in Nigeria, as I said earlier, was quite chaotic. I had great moments, don't get me wrong, but as I became aware, as I grew up, I became more aware of a lot of things that just weren't right. And so when we made the transition of coming to the UK, I felt quite grateful that I didn't have to be in that space anymore, especially because my dad did not migrate with us to the UK. And so I think I just felt safer. I felt safer in a space where he wasn't present. And I also have a younger sister who was born in the UK, and I was grateful that she wouldn't have him present in her life also, and that she didn't have to go through a lot of the stresses that I did as a kid. I mean, I was a kid at this point, but I was aware of that already. And I think that even though settling in the UK and establishing a life in the UK was incredibly difficult, especially for my mother, who was a single mom and having to raise 2 kids on her own, I was just so grateful to be safer. And so life went on. I grew up, I went to uni, and eventually I start working, I get into the corporate space. As soon as I joined the corporate world, I knew it wasn't for me. Like I knew that. But I guess I shoehorned it because, I don't know, I just thought, how do I explain this? I don't think I realized how much I just wanted to be safe. So even though the environment wasn't actually for me and I knew that, I just wanted to have a job and to be safe and secure like everyone else. And especially because coming from the background that I came from, I had internalized that this was actually the best outcome for me as a person. My story being Black woman immigrant, I just felt that my mom had worked so hard for me to have this opportunity to be in a steady job, in a safer job that could provide a stable and steady income, right? So the environment wasn't for me, but I just kept doing it. And I was grateful that I had it. I was grateful that I had the access to that and I could do it. But then my dad passed away. He lived in Nigeria for the rest of his life. I hadn't actually seen him since I left as a kid. I had interactions with him over the phone and things like that, but I hadn't fully processed or become aware of how much I was suppressing or repressing and my traumas that were associated with him. And so in 2022, when I got the news that he had passed away, I had to face a lot of those traumas. They just came up. I couldn't control it. I wasn't doing well. And in that phase, I was dealing with such a weird, I don't know how to actually describe it. I don't know if the right terminology is grief or just, I think it was a combination of dealing with the grief and then also having to navigate everything that I'd repressed in my childhood, which was incredibly difficult. But then I was still at my job and my workload was immense. And I was struggling mentally. I was not in a good place mentally. And I had to keep showing up at work. I had to keep coming to work and still trying to give my very best. And that's incredibly difficult. And it just meant that I was completely burnt out. I was so burnt out because I was managing a lot on my plate. But in this burnout phase, this is where a lot of my realizations about life start to kick in. And I think that it's unfortunate, the human condition of needing to suffer to then come to an epiphany or like come to a realization. It's so unfortunate. But in that phase of my life, I realized that I was holding on to this job, but I didn't love my job. It gave me financial stability, and that was it. But I kept holding on to it. I guess so much was happening in the world. Maybe those things that were happening in the world also reminded me of what I could have been. And I'll elaborate on that. It's the current situation. For example, there's a lot of conversations around migrants. There's a lot of conversations around small boats. There's a lot of conversation around children in Congo, children in Gaza, children in this and that, children in situations that they can't control and are being exploited and being taken advantage of. And I think I always internalized that. I think that I had always felt that could have been me. Because, you know, like I said, I was born in Nigeria. My family's initial financial situation was quite stable, but then it became unstable. And for example, as a child, I was sick with malaria and like typhoid all the time. So actually not having access to healthcare is the difference between life and death. And I was aware of this. I was aware of the fact that I felt lucky as a child to have escaped or to have left a situation where I would have been one of those children in situations where I'm being exploited. And so I think that because so much is always going on in the world, and so much, especially now, obviously with social media and just being so connected to news all the time, we're a lot more aware. I feel that mentality or that perspective was even stronger, that I felt that I had to be grateful for what I had. And so it was like, even though I was going through this difficult time, trauma, grief, crazy workload, burnout, it's astounding to me how much I convinced myself that I should be grateful for what I have. But then it gets to a point, doesn't it, when you go through these phases in life where you just hit rock bottom and you can't carry on as you are anymore. And so I got to that point, and then genuinely my perspective on what I was grateful for just started to shift, because I physically couldn't even carry on in my job. I just was at such a low. And yeah, it's a time of my life that, you know, I'm grateful that I went through, because, you know, it allowed me to shift my perspective. But honestly, I'd never want to go back there in my life again, ever. But through all of this, I realized that because I was so accustomed to such great levels of suffering, I was grateful when I was in a situation that was exploiting me. And, you know, the corporate world is a real analogy for how the world works, right? Because the corporate world attaches value to every human being who works in a corporate space. But then it's under the guise of skill. So they say to you, oh, we pay you in exchange for the skills that you possess. But we don't just exchange skill for monetary value. We exchange our time, our existence. We exchange our energy for monetary value. But then there's like a hierarchy of this skill. We are in this hierarchy of suffering, right? And we're all just doing our best to not be at the bottom level of suffering, like on the extreme levels of suffering, you know? Depending on where you sit in race, class, gender, you suffer to a certain degree. And I think most of us are just doing our best to not be on the extreme end of the suffering that could be applied to a human being, or could be applied to like anybody's existence. I hope I'm making sense, but my point is, I think that that could be applied to how I felt about myself at that time, when I, for example, going back to the point I was saying of always feeling like I could have been any of these people that I read about in the news all the time. And there was that feeling of being glad I'm just not that, and also feeling guilty because I knew that could have been me. So there's this feeling of like, yeah, it's a combination of guilt and gratefulness. And I think that can be applied to the wider world. Because we're so accustomed to such extreme levels of suffering, we are grateful when we're not in that extreme, but we're still suffering, is my point. I made the transition from my childhood, establishing a life in the UK, and now being in what's perceived as a good job. And so it's like, phew, I'm here now. But even in that reality, I'm expected to disregard my very human experience and prove my value to a company so that I can have a decent life. And I was grateful for that. And I essentially realized that actually I was grateful for my own exploitation. I think we all are complicit in this mindset of knowing that something is quite off with the reality that we're in, but at the same time being grateful for what we have, because it could be worse. And we know it could be worse. We see it happen all the time. And we're just grateful that we're not in that extreme. And the more I realized this, the more my perspective on gratitude started to shift, because I started to question what I was grateful for. And this brings me to my point. The point I'm trying to make in this whole video is that essentially I realized that in being grateful for my own exploitation, I was complicit in upholding the system. I realized that I was grateful for this reality that has reduced all our existence to profit. And the system that we have in place right now actually only benefits a very small amount of people in society. It's just pure exploitation. And I now understand that actually this current system that we have in place feeds off scarcity and fear. It tells us that there isn't enough to go around, and so we should be grateful when we get a piece. And this is something I've seen online a lot, that I try my best to not let it enrage me, but it does. It's when people make so many reels and like posts saying, oh, I'm grateful that I have a job to complain about. I'm grateful that I have food in my plate. I'm grateful that I have this, access to clean water and things like that. And I think we need to start questioning why it's okay for us to be grateful that we get access to these things while others don't. Going back to my point on scarcity, right? This idea that there is not enough to go around, and so you need to be grateful when you get some, just isn't, it's not true. It's just not true. It's just not true. It's something we need to really start shifting away from, because when I think about existence and when I think about Earth, the planet itself reaffirms to me that there is an abundance. The only thing that is causing scarcity is quite literally human behavior. We've never had to leave the planet to find any resource that we need. to give ourselves a good quality of life. This planet is the best planet that we know of so far to sustain human life. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that's my understanding. We can't find another like it, and it has everything, like literally everything we've made has come from this planet. It comes from within, it comes from home. And so it has more than enough to give us a beautiful life. It has more than enough, not just to allow us to survive, but to also thrive in beauty. And we need to start understanding that actually having access to a great quality of life, to safety, to healthcare, to clean food, clean water, is given to us by nature. Even the creativity that comes from human beings, from humans, is part of that system, and it's given to us freely. And it's all these things are our birthright. That's how I perceive it now. Now I understand that actually like I said, the earth is the best, and I'm born on earth. So I was given the best. The best is what we are all entitled to. And in our lack of consciousness and our lack of empathy, we allow ourselves to be enslaved by the systems that we've put in place. And we're grateful for crumbs. We're grateful for our exploitation. We uphold our oppression because we're not conscious enough. And we really need to start reassessing that. I try to do so in my life. I'm not saying I'm perfect at it. Trust me, it takes a long time to unlearn years of learned behavior. But I'm really trying my best to assess what I am complicit in. I think truly assessing what we feel we deserve in life is one of the ways that we can actually protest. Because the thing about it is, when you justify and rationalize your own suffering, you are more likely to accept the suffering of other human beings. And if you take yourself for granted and you take your existence for granted, you're going to be comfortable with other people's existence being taken for granted. That's how I see it. I feel that when, it might seem a bit radical to say so, sorry. It might be a bit radical to say this, but when I was going through that phase of severe burnout, I now understand that I was taking myself for granted. I took my existence for granted, because why would I give you so much of my existence and you don't even want to pay me well for it? You still want to find cheaper. That's insane. But now, don't get me wrong, I still exist within the confines of this systems that we have in place. So I still have to work, and actually in this system you can't truly ever be free, but I am aware of it now. And so I put boundaries in place in how I work now to allow myself to be my best version, like to allow me to actually put a better version of myself forward. So yeah, don't rationalize your own suffering, and do not be grateful for your own exploitation, is my point. I need to drink some water. And just to emphasize, like, when I talk about the system, I'm not talking about capitalism. Capitalism is not the reason we're in this situation, because capitalism is just another manifestation of what the true problem is. The true problem of society is a lack of consciousness and a lack of empathy. This is at the core of everything. This reality is all one big symptom of a lack of consciousness and empathy, in my opinion. And until we truly start to really assess individuals, us as individuals start to really assess our level of consciousness, we can change what we're grateful for. But then also, we can contribute to the wider collective consciousness, because obviously we have our individual consciousness, and then through that, when we work on that, we can contribute to a wider consciousness. And yeah, I am no longer grateful for a system that exploits me. I am no longer grateful to have access to food, water, safety, while others don't. Actually, my way of thinking now is that if this is my birthright as a human, like I was saying earlier, Earth is abundant. And if this is my birthright, how come somebody else doesn't have access to their birthright? That is unfair. So I think when you reassess what you're grateful for, it will prompt you to question the system, because you will discover that you're being exploited as well as others. You don't see yourself as separate from that system. You realize that you are part of the exploitation, like you're also in that boat, basically. And yeah, I now look at I practice gratitude in a different way. I am grateful. I'm grateful for what I call the divine, in the sense that I'm grateful for Earth, and I'm grateful for everything it gives us. I'm grateful that I'm allowed to exist in such beauty. This reality is so far from what it could be. We are so disconnected from everything that is truly us. We're so far off what we could be, the way of life we could have. We're so disconnected. And now that I realize that, I try to connect myself to other human beings, nature. I'm grateful to have the experience, experience existence, and be able to connect with other human beings, be able to, like I said, exist in such beauty. When I'm in nature, there is such a grounding feeling I get. When I look at the moon, I take so many pictures of the moon, but when I look at that, I cannot fathom that I exist in such beauty, and I get to experience that. So yeah, I think the best way to explain it is that I am grateful for Earth and everything that it gives me, for nature and everything that it gives me, but I am not grateful for a system that exploits me and everybody else to access what is naturally given to us. I'm not grateful for that system. And just to reemphasize, I can't stress this enough, the system isn't capitalism. The system that we're all really suffering from is a lack of consciousness and empathy. But yeah, I'm not grateful for whatever's born out of a lack of consciousness and empathy. I hope I've made sense. I hope that this maybe prompts you to question what you're grateful for. And there's a lot to be grateful about, don't get me wrong. But I think we really need to start walking around with the attitude and the confidence, knowing that we deserve the best, because that's what we were given. We deserve the best that life has to offer, the very best. And we should question it. When someone is saying that you need to prove your value to gain that, when the system tells you you need to prove your value to gain that, we need to question that and not be grateful for that. Let's hopefully change our perspective on that. I hope I make sense. But anyways, I'm done talking now. I hope you found this insightful in some way. And if you enjoyed watching my video, rather than liking and subscribing, I would just prefer it if you just walked around with that mindset of you deserve the best. That's literally the best thing that could happen. I would love for more people to do that. So yeah, thank you for watching, and I'll see you on my next video. Bye.